and from that place of love being the most important, I have a hard time seeing, same-sex relationship with, loving each other and loving their kid. I have a hard time seeing that as a sin. And so I don't think anything LGBTQIA is sin. I don't. And I did a deep dive into the Bible a long time ago in translations, and there's a lot of that people that believe that that's not godly, and I have a hard time seeing it that way. Again, starting from a place of love and moving on from there. So that's where I stand with it. And I think that we should be loving everyone, Black and brown bodies. Everyone should be loved the same. And I think that when we see it not happening, that it is our calling to address that.
Welcome to the Kindness Is podcast, where we take a deep dive into the true meaning of kindness. I'm your host, Caitlin Johnstone, the co-founder of Kind Cotton. Let's dive in. For this week's episode, I truly want to paint a picture, something that many of us can probably relate to. I want to go back all the way to 2020, when the world first shut down and we were feeling extreme uncertainty. I was one of those people who was wiping down my groceries, who was staying home for 2 weeks in the hopes that everything would be over soon. I didn't know what information was correct. I didn't know what to listen to. I didn't know who to follow. All I knew was that I needed a space in which I could turn to and hear accurate information. And, I think I could do an entire podcast, and maybe we will one day, about the dangers of misinformation. But that's not what this is all about, because my guest today became a safe space for me. She was the one who I would go to, and I say this almost metaphorically, I would go to watch her videos in the middle of the night when I had a crying newborn throughout the day, uncertain of how I was going to keep this little life safe. She was someone who was in the state of Florida, as we were at the time, taking things incredibly seriously because she believed in science. She had studied for years and years and years to become a pediatric doctor, and I trusted her. She was someone who didn't make me feel fearful, but made me feel hopeful that things were going to be okay if we did the necessary things to keep our family safe. Fast forward to today, and I am so grateful that I get to call Drbeachgem someone who I am in community with, someone who I still look up to, someone who provides accurate information, but someone who also displays an immense amount of generosity and kindness and love and empathy. And I am just so absolutely filled with gratitude to have her on the podcast this week. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Kindness Is pod. I'm really excited today because I have Drbeachgem here, and she, as I shared with her a little bit before we started, really got me through the pandemic in many ways. Actually, I don't want to say, through it, because I realize that we are still in it, but I just want to share in those early days, she was such a sounding board for me, and I know she was for a lot of people. She is a pediatric emergency medicine physician who has 4 kids and 4 cats, one of which you may see throughout this podcast because I've already had the privilege of meeting them, and a very supportive husband. She grew a social media following through the COVID-19 pandemic and continues to educate followers about pediatric health topics while also addressing a lot of misinformation that exists out there online. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. This is really cool.
Yeah. What inspired you to go into pediatrics specifically?
So I feel like I've always really enjoyed hanging out with kids. Like I did a lot of babysitting and stuff when I was younger. And my family, I was not a foster child, but my family was a foster family when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. So there were kind of just always kids around and just somebody to hang out with. And so when I started going into medicine, obviously there's adult medicine and then there's pediatrics. And I found adult medicine just to be like really frustrating and sad. And then I went into peds, and there's so much hope and so much fun, and you blow bubbles and you give toys out, and there's just so much more hope and enjoyment in pediatrics. And through that, I don't really feel like I need to grow up. I can wear superhero shirts and I can have fun at work. And so pediatrics is just a really fun specialty to be in. And in emergency medicine, it's so fast paced that we get to have fun on a faster paced type level.
I love that. See, my mind would immediately go to, it must be so much harder because it's kids, particularly being in emergency medicine. I can imagine that there's times where it's sad, right? And I love that you phrase it in that you get to be that fun person for a child, and you get to bring them hope and bring families hope, because I would kind of go to, oh man, I don't know if I could do this because of the difficult times and the things that I'm sure have been hard for you.
Yeah. I think probably like 40% of my job is just providing reassurance that, the kid looks great. Families are doing a great job. Keep doing what you're doing. Probably less than 5% is dealing with the really bad stuff, which means one case or less generally per shift.
Okay.
Which, it adds up at a certain point. And we kind of have to do our best at the time to compartmentalize so that we can, go into the next case of strep throat after we came out of the bad case. And we certainly work, we have our ups and downs with that. Sometimes it's more of a struggle, and sometimes we get good at it. And I think the most important thing is that making sure that when we come home that we have some coping mechanisms to be able to deal with that. Pediatrics is challenging for lots of different reasons. You've got, parents, and sometimes the parent is actually the patient. You're actually managing their feelings and emotions, and the kid is totally fine. But you have to make sure that the family is going to be able to manage what's going on. So there are different complexities that go along with pediatrics, but I really feel like the benefits are well worth it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Having been in education and loving the little kids, particularly, I taught most of my years, all but one actually, in kindergarten. And people always thought that was crazy. Like, that's the grade that you go to when you're almost in trouble. You know what I mean? Like, admin would be like, all right, I'm just going to put you in kindergarten because I want you to leave, sort of thing. That was like the unspoken rule of elementary education. But I loved it so much so that when I moved from kindergarten and there was an opening, I went to my principal and was like, I want to go back to kindergarten. She was like, you just made my life so easy. Like, yes, you can. And thank you. But something that I often found in education, and I'm wondering if you see this a lot in your line of work too, is almost this sense of children, not seeing children in their full humanity, right? Like not embracing the fact that they are humans who are going to have like big emotions and probably have feelings about their care too. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. I know that was a very broad.
No, I think you nailed it. And I think it's something that I have to, we have lots of residents and learners that come through our hospital all the time. And some of them are pediatric, some of them are family medicine, and some of them are emergency medicine. And so not all of them have a strong background in pediatrics. And so it's a little bit out of their comfort zone. And what I do see a lot of times in those interactions is they're talking, the kid's in the bed, the mom's on the other side on the couch, and they're kind of talking over the kid, kind of not even talking to the kid. They're talking over the kid to the adult in the room. And as a pediatrician and someone that's worked with kids generally, I'm getting down, next to the kid on the bed. Hey, this is what's going on, buddy. We're going to do this and that. And then I talk to the parent after, do you have any other questions? Do you have any other thoughts about what we're going to do? But the kid is the patient. And so I want to address the patient. And then obviously the parent is part of that too. But really addressing the child, because they are a human and they are involved in this. I think it's the same thing that, and just kind of off topic a little bit, is with discipline in kids. I think we see a lot of that, like not necessarily treating kids like humans, with discipline, like, you wouldn't hit another adult, but people do feel comfortable providing that, providing discipline in the form of, physical punishment. But, if my boss came up and did that to me, I'm going straight to HR. They're getting arrested. So how we feel comfortable doing, providing physical discipline for kids, and we're not treating them like humans. We're treating them like something different. I wouldn't even do that to an animal. I wouldn't hit a dog. There's people that, so there is so much of that, we see kids as small people, but we don't treat them as people. We treat them as something else kind of, and it's an interesting kind of thought process.
Yeah, no, I'm always curious to hear anyone who works with children's ideas about that, because I think that really relates back to what we do in talking about kindness, right? If I can stand here and talk about equity and justice and inclusion and all of these things that I talk about that are typically geared towards adults, we need to have that same respect for children. And I think we miss the mark a lot of times as a society on that, whether it be through our parenting or education or, possibly in the healthcare field, which is why I was so curious.
Yeah. The education too, like, obviously I'm not in education, so I hadn't even thought of that, but that aspect of it, like the stuff that's happening, especially here in Florida with education right now, you wouldn't see that happen in an adult workplace necessarily. But we're, taking funding away from kids, and we're taking education away from kids, and yeah, 100%.
And they're the ones who suffer from it.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, as you know, a little bit, that was why we left Florida. It didn't feel like a safe space anymore, particularly with the work that we do. We had people who were showing up on doorsteps of school board members who found out about what we do and providing inclusive books, who were kind of threatening to do the same things. And it's scary right now. Your husband ran for school board, correct?
He did. He ran for school board here in Pinellas County against someone who was a Moms for Liberty. And we also had some threats, and someone showed up at our doorstep who had a kind of social media following. And that got a little scary for a little bit. And I feel like it's important that I stay here just because I'm able to provide medical care in a safe way to kids. And so I feel like I don't want to abandon them. I feel like that's what I would be doing in this situation. But certainly for my kids, it's something that we talk about regularly, inclusion and LGBTQ issues, making sure that they're getting the education that they needed. Even now, sexual health education, they're pulling from schools. And I know my kids are going to get that education, but I worry about the other kiddos out there that are not going to get that education because they're not going to get it at home. They're not going to get it at school. They have no idea what's going on with their bodies. And it's so complex at this age, in that, 5th grade to 7th grade time when things are changing. And we've just totally removed any opportunity for them to know about their bodies.
Yeah, it's really scary, which also takes away the opportunity to have ownership over your body, which then takes away the opportunity to have consent over your body, right? We want children to grow up and be able to say no to abuse, but then we're taking away the tools necessary to make them feel comfortable in doing so. And that's a huge disservice.
I 100% agree. 100% agree. That was a big leap that you just made and just blew my mind, because you're right. Like, if they don't know, where they need to have boundaries, it's all off. And I think that we're making them, potential targets. The number of people that can't use the words for body parts that come to the ER, and they're older, they're not, 2 or 3, 4-year-olds that can't use words. It's the 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th graders that are not using words, that can't really explain what's happening, when I'm asking them questions about what's going on. And these are words that they need to be able to use, and they're just normal anatomy words. They're not bad words, but they don't know it because they haven't been taught it.
Yeah. And then interestingly enough, I think a lot of times it's the people who are yelling, protect the children.
Yeah.
That's a whole
Yes.
nother, I mean, we could go on about that. But yeah, my daughter is 3.5 and she knows appropriate anatomy words for her body parts and others' body parts.
Yeah.
And it it's simple. She gets it. Same thing as you mentioned, with talking to your children about inclusion. And if my daughter ever has any questions about disabilities, or my daughter has any questions about LGBTQIA community, it's very simple to have the conversations. Or if she notices that someone's skin color is different, we've had all these conversations. And again, books are a wonderful tool, which is something I would imagine why your husband ran for school board in
Yeah,
support of inclusive education.
absolutely.
And that's being taken away. And that's I want to say thank you for being there. You are stronger than I. Um, there came a point where my mental health was really not well, and I think we're going to get into that next, which is how you made such a name for yourself during the pandemic and really relaying appropriate information to folks, because there were multi layers as to why I never felt safe living in Florida. So tell us about that. Did you start social media at the start of the pandemic? Were you active prior?
I I got onto TikTok. It was probably a couple months into the pandemic,
Okay.
when things in the ER just had, pediatric patients weren't getting as sick as adult patients, and
Mhm.
and they were staying home from school. So in the pediatric
Mm.
ER, we weren't seeing the volumes of patients that adults were, and so my shifts got cut down because we just didn't need to staff the ER the same way. And so I was honestly just getting like kind of sitting on my hands, no
Mm.
activities for the kids, and so I got onto TikTok and initially was just kind of goofing around, making some silly videos, and then obviously seeing a lot of the misinformation that was starting to be propagated around. And so I started to make some videos to address some of it. And I think, and it's hard for me to have that perspective, but a lot of people just said that it came off as authentic and real and kind of genuine information. And so started to grow following that way.
Yeah, I mean, there were days where I was lying in bed like, what? Sorry, I feel like I'm gonna get emotional. Like what? Who can I look to? Because navigating that world was really scary at the time. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay.
um, and I can remember like nights laying in bed seeking out your videos to know that I was not crazy for wearing a mask in public in the state of Florida, or I was not crazy for like praying for the day that vaccines were going to come out, or I was not crazy for setting like strong boundaries around, well, if you're going out and doing XYZ, I think we need to wait a while before we see you.
Yeah.
Because I have very high risk parents who I'm incredibly close to, and I had a newborn at the time. And I know you've probably heard this a million times, but I really thank you for doing that, because there are a lot of us still to this day, right? Like
Yeah.
we don't really know what's happening still.
Yeah. I think, in those early days, especially that first like year and a half
Yeah.
during the pandemic, there was just so much that was unknown. And, the scientific community is doing their best in moving forward with research. But when they publish research, it's in this such high level
Hmm.
information. And it's so hard to take this really high level information and make it something that, a normal person that doesn't have that medical background can understand. And I think what we were seeing was people taking like a sentence out of this, 20-page paper and trying to like, make arguments that, the pandemic wasn't real or the virus, it's just the flu or whatever they were saying. And so I think part of what I was able to do is take some of that information and clarify and to decomplicate it a little bit
Yeah.
and kind of translate it into stuff that people could understand. And I didn't, it again, I don't think I have real good insight into what was happening, but I know a lot of people have said the same thing, that, this was a really hard time. And
Hmm.
being able to have someone that they trusted to come to get good information that was evidence-based, someone who was like living it like the rest of us were, like, we wore masks all the time, everywhere for years. We were vaccinated as soon as we could. And there's just so much. And we also, like, we had not all of our family and all of our friends were on the same page. And so we did have to create those boundaries, and boundaries are for us, not for them. And so if they weren't, we had to hold up those boundaries, even though they were kind of pushing. So it was a challenging time. And I think, I'm glad that I was able to be there. Even though I don't think I knew at the time what an impact I was making.
Yeah, it was huge. I mean, it still continues to be. I find myself, whenever I see yours or a few other creators' videos, I'm like, oh, it's important to keep up on this information, because I feel like, overall as a society, we've moved on from a lot of things, or we may not want to be open to hearing new information. I think we've gotten really good at becoming what another guest who I've had on the podcast, Syra Rao, calls as violent indifference. Like, we're really good at being okay with this not knowing, because it's more comfortable and we feel better, and we don't want to be aware of some serious situations that may be going on. So there are a lot of people, and you being one of them, who I like to go to kind of ground me in the information. Do I always want to hear it? I'm like, oh goodness, like, cases are high again, or there's this other stuff coming out that no, of course I don't want to know, but I want to be able to have that so that I can make the best decisions for me and my family. And I think a lot of people really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think education is so powerful, and it really changes things. To know, like, hey, there's locally transmitted malaria. Like, it's important. Like, I don't want to know it. It's not happening very much, but all I have to take from that video is, hey, I should probably put on some insect repellent when I go outside, and potentially wear long sleeves and long pants if the weather's able to. So I try to make it digestible and just give that, like, potentially like 1 or 2 liner at the end. But man, it is so powerful to be able to provide education and to receive education. And there is so much more that is happening beyond, our little, our house and our community and our state and our country. And I think it's important to be aware, at least, of some of those implications.
Yeah, and I think that's what's hard for people too, right? Like, I often go back to this saying when thinking about kindness, is that it shouldn't have to directly affect you for you to care about it.
Yes.
Right? So, like, with the pandemic, like, maybe you didn't know anyone who ended up with long COVID or passed away or was heavily impacted by that. Or maybe you haven't, thankfully been impacted by gun violence. Or I would find it very hard to believe that you don't have anyone in your life who you love dearly who isn't a part of the LGBTQ plus community,
Right.
or who isn't Black or brown, or but all of those things should still matter to us.
Yes, 100%.
And I think that's what we should pass down to our children, right, going forward. So I've kind of gone about this in a roundabout way, but if you had to choose what your definition of kindness is, what would it be?
I think it's kind of like a generous spirit would be one of my thoughts, but I think kindness can be, like, my thought of kindness, and this may come from kind of a Christian background, is kind of putting yourself second. And so, like, that could mean, it may mean giving some of your money to someone else. That's you could have used that money, but putting yourself second. It's taking an extra second in my comments where I want to just tear into someone, and just taking a step back and being like, starting from a base of them having a genuine question. And, all right, let's come back to that. And then let's answer in a way that isn't as fun, but, maybe is more kind. And again, coming from a place that maybe they're not being sassy, maybe they're actually asking genuinely or something like that. So I think my thought is, kind of putting yourself second and giving someone else that opportunity first.
I hope it's okay that I ask you this. You mentioned it's coming from a place of Christianity, and I know your beliefs, like as a human, and where you stand on certain things. And I'm wondering if you can just dive into that a little bit longer
Yeah.
and explain what your views as a Christian are, because I think it's really important that we have those conversations,
Yeah.
particularly now when we see things that are happening in states such as Florida with kind of like Christian nationalism and stuff. And I
Yes.
think it's so important for people to understand the difference.
Yeah. So I think that and I say my version of the Bible, but the things that I focus on in the Bible and from the teachings of Jesus, which is again where my Christianity is based, is it's love. Like there's nothing else. Like Christianity it's love, it's loving other people, it's loving partly because of Jesus loving us and sacrificing himself for us. But all of the there's a lot of judgment and
Mm,
stuff in the church, and I feel like we were called to love first. Like the love should come before anything else. And honestly, it is not my place to judge. It is my job to love my neighbor. I and from that place of love being the most important, I have a hard time seeing, a same-sex relationship with, loving each other and loving their kid. I have a hard time seeing that as a sin. And so I don't think
mm,
anything LGBTQIA is sin. I don't. And I did a deep dive into the Bible a long time ago in translations, and there's a lot of that people that believe that that's not godly, and I have a hard time seeing it that way. Again,
mm,
starting from a place of love and moving on from there. So that's where I stand with it, and I think that we should be loving everyone, black and brown bodies. Everyone should be loved the same, and I think that when we see it not happening,
mhm.
that it is our calling to address that.
Yeah.
Um, there's such disparity in the world that we live in, especially for people with skin colors that are different than mine. And I think it is our jobs as Christians to love those people and to address those situations. And so, it's my brand of Christianity, and
Mhm.
love comes first, like 100% of the time. People are important, children matter. So that's my Christian background. Um, I I didn't necessarily grow up in the church, but I started going to church when I was in middle school, and I went on a bunch of
Mhm.
mission trips, which are a completely separate situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
That would
I
be a
don't
whole nother podcast.
whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
I got some feelings
Mhm.
about that. And I was baptized in the Dominican Republic in this beautiful mountain stream, fully dunked. And it was a really cool experience. And being able to see um, I will say that being able to see how other people live in other countries really instilled a lot of that, even though maybe I didn't get there for the best reasons, but just
Yeah.
being in another country and seeing how other people live and seeing their grateful spirit, and then coming back here and seeing the things that we complain about and that we are upset about. A
Mhm.
lot of it, again, just it doesn't matter. We really should
Mhm.
be focused on the things that matter, and kindness and love, and
Mhm.
treating each other with respect and making sure that other people are treated with respect and the care that they deserve.
Is it hard for you to see Christianity weaponized?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is so frustrating.
Yeah.
And, people that what would Jesus do? He wouldn't do that. I
Yeah.
can tell
Okay.
you he
Yeah.
wouldn't do that. He wouldn't take education out of schools. He wouldn't not teach kids about their bodies. Would he would teach, and that's what he did. Jesus was a teacher. He taught us. And so Jesus would be educating, he would be giving books out, he would be making sure that there was equity and equality, because he loved everyone. He didn't just love the white people, the white Christian
Mhm.
cis hetero men.
Yeah.
He was here for all of us. And so seeing what I believe so strongly weaponized, it's very frustrating. And I kind of honestly have created a separation in my mind for my own
Mm,
mental health, because
mhm.
what I believe is not what they're believing, and that judgment and stuff, I separate myself from.
Yeah, I can imagine that must be hard. And I've been curious to talk to someone about that And I appreciate you sharing so openly. And I thank you for doing all the things that you do. And if for some odd reason you are not yet following Dr. Beachgem, go ahead and do so. How else can people support you before we hop off this?
I think that's the best way to support me
Yeah.
right now is just to follow. I'm on TikTok, I'm Beachgem10, and on Instagram, I'm Drbeachgem10. And I think honestly, that's just the best way to support right now. My house flooded. We're on this crazy situation.
Yes, I was
Where
about to say we can't go without as soon as I was like, how can we support you? I said, oh my goodness, Caitlin, you forgot the whole one of the main reasons that I had you on. Please share.
Yeah. So we live in a bit of a low-lying area in St. Petersburg. And so when Hurricane Idalia came through, we had quite a bit of storm surge come into the house, several inches of kind of really gross water. And so we've had to kind of gut 4 feet and down of drywall, and we lost our appliances and a lot of the stuff that was in the house itself. We are currently in a very cozy condo. It's a 1-1 for my 4 kids and 4 cats and husband and myself. But actually, it's going pretty well, I have to say. We are our kind of whole neighborhood, almost half of our neighborhood flooded. And so there's a lot of people, about 1,200 people that are dealing with that. And, you know, a lot of us are displaced. So I think we're just kind of trying to work through as a community, and we've had a lot of support, which is awesome. We've had like Kathy Castor and Lindsay Cross coming through, offering their support, making sure that we're getting what we need from like FEMA and stuff like that. And we've had FEMA come through, and we're just we're doing the thing right now.
Yeah. And you have a GoFundMe, correct?
I do have a
Like, to
GoFundMe.
help other families as well, right?
Yep. So I didn't necessarily want to start the GoFundMe, and someone kind of like physically sat me down before I'd even gotten to my house, and they said, "We want to be able to support you as a community." And she followed me on TikTok, and so very quickly, you know, I received a pretty decent amount of money, and then I started looking around at the community, and there's a lot of people in need right now in my community. We have a neighbor that their house caught fire. They flooded and then they caught fire, and their house is just there's nothing that's salvageable from their house. So I was able to give her some of those GoFundMe funds. We have 3 other people in the neighborhood that we've also given money to at this point. One of them, she actually just adopted her nephew to be her son yesterday, and we were on this podcast. It was like the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. So it's just been a really cool opportunity to be able to help support our neighbors with this, you know, community and this gift that TikTok has given me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really beautiful. And I'm going to put that in the show notes. Send that over to me so that we can support you and support everyone in your community, because I mean, that's it, right? That's what you explained is kindness, is kind of putting someone ahead of yourself, and in times of need, helping when you can. So yeah, please check that out if you're listening. Again, I so appreciate you. I guess this will be the formal wrap up. Thank you for all that you do, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So in true Dr. Beachgem fashion, the GoFundMe that she started, that she was talking about on this week's podcast, did not only support her family, but she has been giving thousands of dollars to people in her community. People whose homes have been damaged now twice in the past 3 years, people who have been uprooted from their homes. This is what it's all about. It's about coming together. It's about building community. It's about spreading true kindness. I am just so incredibly grateful that I had the opportunity to talk with her today, to spread her mission, to inspire all of you to go out there and keep fighting for a more kind and more inclusive world. If you have the means to do so, please check out the GoFundMe, because it's important to uplift one another in times of struggle. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of the Kindness Is podcast. If you love it and it's adding even a little bit of value to your life, we would love, love, love if you could subscribe, rate, and review so we can reach even more people and make this world a little bit more kind.